You are standing on a hillside in southern Italy in the year 216 BC. Below you, in a valley near a town called Cannae, the largest Roman army ever assembled has just been destroyed in a single afternoon. Somewhere between 50 and 70,000 Roman soldiers lie dead. The man responsible is watching from higher ground, and his officers are already asking him the same question everyone in Rome is asking themselves in terror. Why hasn't he marched on the city? That man was Hannibal Barca. And the real answer to what would have happened if he had marched is far stranger and far more revealing than a simple story of a missed opportunity. You probably know Hannibal as the general who crossed the Alps with elephants. That image sticks because it's vivid, but it flattens something much more important. By the time he stood near Cannae, Hannibal had already spent 2 years proving something no one in the ancient world believed was possible: that Rome, the rising power of the Mediterranean, could be beaten again and again on its own soil and still refuse to break. Let's start with Cannae itself, because you need to understand just how total this victory was. Hannibal's forces were outnumbered. Historian Adrian Goldsworthy, whose research reconstructs Roman military doctrine in detail, has described how Hannibal deliberately weakened his center, let the Romans push forward into what looked like a collapsing line, and then closed his cavalry around both flanks like a trap snapping shut. The Roman army didn't just lose. It was surrounded and annihilated almost to the last man. It remains, to this day, one of the most complete tactical destructions of an army in recorded history. So why didn't he march on Rome? This is where the popular story usually simplifies things. Hannibal's own cavalry commander, Hannibal, is said to have told him that within 5 days they could be feasting on the Capitoline Hill. Hannibal refused. Hannibal supposedly replied that Hannibal knew how to win a battle, but not how to use a victory. That quote has echoed through history books for over 2,000 years. But here's what it leaves out. Hannibal didn't have a siege train. He had no battering rams, no siege towers, no engineers prepared to breach walls that had been reinforced for exactly this kind of moment. Historian Dexter Hoyos, who has spent decades studying the Second Punic War, has argued that marching on Rome without the ability to actually take the city would have meant sitting outside walls that Hannibal simply couldn't break, while Roman reinforcements from other regions closed in around him. Winning a battle and conquering a fortified city of that size were two completely different problems, and Hannibal knew it. Think about it like this. Imagine you've just won an enormous fight, but you don't have the tools to open the door in front of you, and more opponents are already running toward you from every direction. Do you keep pushing forward and risk being trapped, or do you consolidate what you've already gained? Here's where the alternate history gets genuinely interesting. Let's say Hannibal somehow does march. Let's say, through sheer will, he reaches the gates of Rome in the weeks after Cannae. What actually happens next? Rome, in 216 BC, was not some fragile city waiting to collapse. Its walls, built centuries earlier and reinforced repeatedly, were some of the strongest in the ancient Mediterranean. Historian Richard Miles, who has studied Carthaginian strategy extensively, points out that even in the panic following Cannae, Rome still had thousands of soldiers within reach, allied cities that had not defected, and a political system that, however chaotic, refused to negotiate surrender. The Senate didn't sue for peace. It didn't recall its armies from Spain or Sicily. It raised new legions from whatever citizens remained, including, in a moment of genuine desperation, freed slaves. That single decision tells you something profound about why Rome was different from every other power Hannibal had faced. Most ancient states, after a defeat of that scale, would negotiate. Rome's entire political culture was built around the assumption that it simply did not lose wars permanently. It absorbed catastrophic losses and kept generating soldiers, resources, and allies because its strength wasn't concentrated in one battle or one city. It was distributed across a network of loyal Italian communities that, crucially, mostly stayed loyal even after Cannae. So even in the alternate version where Hannibal marches and lays siege, you're not looking at a quick collapse. You're looking at a grinding siege against reinforced walls, with no functioning siege equipment, surrounded by a countryside that could still produce more Roman soldiers than Hannibal's army could realistically handle indefinitely. Historians studying this scenario generally agree that a siege likely fails or stalls, and Hannibal ends up in a far more exposed and vulnerable position than the one he was actually in. And this is the part that reframes everything. Hannibal wasn't just a brilliant tactician who hesitated at the worst possible moment. He was a general operating with a specific strategic theory. His goal from the beginning wasn't to erase Rome, it was to shatter the confederation of Italian allies that gave Rome its manpower and force Rome to make peace on his terms, the way other Mediterranean powers had done after catastrophic defeats. Cannae was supposed to be the moment the theory paid off. Multiple Italian cities and regions did defect to him afterward, but not enough, and not the ones that mattered most. Why does that matter to you sitting here so many centuries later? Because it's a lesson in the difference between winning an engagement and winning a system. You can dismantle an opponent's army in a single afternoon and still lose if the thing you're actually fighting isn't a battlefield. It's a network, a culture, a refusal to quit that isn't rational in the moment, but turns out to be exactly the trait that wins in the long run. Rome would go on fighting Hannibal in Italy for over a decade after Cannae, slowly avoiding open battle, wearing him down, cutting off his reinforcements, until the war eventually shifted to North Africa and ended not on Italian soil, but on Carthage's own doorstep at the Battle of Zama. So picture yourself back on that hillside above Cannae, watching the greatest tactical victory in ancient history unfold beneath you. It would be easy to assume the war was already over, but you're not just watching the end of a battle. You're watching the exact moment two very different ideas about power collided. One built on brilliant, decisive strikes. The other built on refusing, no matter what, to ever fully break. And in the long run, across 15 years of war, it was the second idea that decided everything.